Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm going to show you how to quick and dirty turn some saw waves into kind of an orchestra. And I'm going to do that by showing you some sounds in this track that I'm working on. I'm just going to play you just a little bit here just to give you an idea of what we're even talking about. And it's not that loud, but I'm still going to play it in 3, 2, 1. That's that. So here's the purpose of what's going on here. This is for when you're making like not a very orchestra focused track, but you kind of want that like orchestra feel, and you feel like loading up a big old sample library of really good samples just to filter them all down and reverb them to death. This is just kind of a waste of doing those samples when largely, if you knew enough about what to put ahead of that stuff, you could probably just make that yourself. And here's pretty much how. Let's go top down. Actually, no, the opposite direction. Let's go bottom up because that's how I made this. Um, so the first dude, by the way, I love this. I don't remember which update FL did this, but you can group tracks up and set them up in such a way. Where even is it? Is it in track mode? Is it in the view options? It might be in the view options. There's a setting that lets it go away altogether. Yeah, high collapse group tracks. There it is, and like it's amazing because now I can just have the MIDI all grouped up and nice, and there's modulation in places, and it can be there. I can have entire universes hidden from view. It's really kind of nice. Yeah, sequitur as hell, but whatever. Okay. First dude is this dude, the low dude. When I first started making them, I intended to make like a brass deal. So this looks complicated and dumb, but you can pretty much disregard this and everything it's connected to. The main process of what's making it is this guy, and this guy, and you're gonna see that kind of repeated in the other two dudes. Is that's mostly just some stuff going on at the beginning, room and like attack control. So and then in this example, there's some reinforcement going on just so that like you can still kind of hear what notes being played because it gets kind of airy. So just to give you an idea, this is what this dude sounds like. Just like very, very light thing there. And this is what this dude sounds like. Pretty much the same, only it's moving. So here's like the not very motiony, and here's the motiony thing. You know, the purpose of the motiony thing is that I want the stuff that like reverb and delay does to things that move around to be done to it, and to make it sound like a kind of active air. That's also the purpose of the delay, but the delay is also doing something special. It's being modulated by an envelope being created by the envelope controller. Yeah. And it gets triggered when you hit a note, and then you hit an output on a control here. Boop, I have number one going. And then you get to an active control. In this case, it's the time. Let's actually get going. So while I'm playing it, you can see how when you move the time knob around, while a delay is playing, it changes the pitch of the delay while it's going on there. And it's all very funky when it's all moving around like that. But if you do it lightly, like we're doing, it does what feels like contrabass or like double bass violins do. Is that what they're called? I should have looked that up before I did this video. But point being is that like when you get a row of them together and you get those big bows and those big strings, you get this kind of feel before you go into and like this is sort of what it sounds like, especially when there's a bunch of them that like they're kind of out of sync and there's sort of like a little bit of a delay to it, and you modulate that, and it's a little bit what it sounds like, doesn't it? This was originally going to be a brassy kind of thing, but what ended up happening with all of these guys all together is that while they do represent individual instrument groups, like this was kind of be a string kind of thing, like it also does the duty of brass, and it's kind of like all three of them represent what all instruments are that they can do all together for their register. So this one, at the end of all this, like it's got the delay, the reverb, and it's being compressed, it's slammed together, and then that's being like EQ'd, and then there's the low and the high, and then that's being compressed together, and then this is being modulated with the big low pass filter. Isn't it interesting that when I control it like that, it doesn't sound anything like an instrument? It just sounds like a saw wave that's been reverbed. That's moving around with a filter, and that's sort of the heart of any kind of physical modeling. Is that you're trying to make a thing act like a thing, and you have to like stay within the confines of what that thing is if you want it to be believably that thing. And a lot of this ideas that I had at all about like, okay, I'm doing this with saw wave harmonics and whatever and coming together with reverb and stuff had came from like staring at like this analysis in EQ, at like staring at like the strings and stuff and just seeing that they look kind of like this. Saw waves are rigidly perfect all the way up the spectrum, but string instruments are not. And brass instruments are a little more perfect, but they're still not perfect either. And there's differences in them, and you can kind of, if you, any way you can think to make these differences happen, will make a thing sound like it. Like this thing by itself just sounds like the dumbest of most basic like saw wave unison configurations, and it's because it is with some like filtering going on, right? And then it's the stuff after it that makes it sound like it's any kind of related to orchestra intentions. But again, this is all about like layering and the idea that no one of these things is going to be paid attention to enough by itself that you could point out all of these flaws at once or attribute them like to other stuff. Because we're doing this in the big synthy song, so you sort of expect it to be synthy stuff. And if you hear what you think is a layer of like an orchestra and some synths, it might not occur to you, the listener, hypothetical listener who's not looking at me doing all this and show it to you, that it's all not just one thing, but a bunch of different things. That there's also an orchestra there. That's sort of what we're going for. And to that end, here's the next one. The high brass version of this, like which is what this is, it was just so much easier, right? And the low guy. So here's what he sounds like. That was the full version. Here's just the delay. And it's like got time modulation going on. It's moving around. And here's the thing without it. So here's the specialness about this guy is that the tone that I was going for required a little bit of forethought. I had to actually know a little bit about how this was going to react with the reverb and the delay to become the thing that I wanted. And it has to do with how fast the unison is going on down here versus how it's going on up here. So this is the unison pitch window inside Harmor. Harmor, an additive synthesizer, lets you do things to individual harmonics as they are all individual sine wave voices that are playing together to add up to whatever thing we're doing. In this case, it's all with some unison. But this graph lets us change how deep the unison detune is per harmonic. And these lines being not straight perfectly across like this implies that there's a steady change across the spectrum. And this causes interesting things at the phase cancellation. That's where all that weird little phasiness is coming from, because there's not much else going on. I don't think I'm doing anything. Nope, that's pretty much it. But where how this matters here is that watch what happens when I move this around. Now, a thought might have occurred to you while I was doing that, which was that literally everything I just did there sounded more brassy and more like a trumpet or something than this version did. In fact, this makes the kind of the top end feel like a weird synthy laser. And again, this has to do with the forethought that I'm going to put reverb and delay on this. And this kind of modulation on these lower harmonics is like what was going to go on in the higher harmonics, but it's like too synthy when it's like that in the higher harmonics. But I still wanted that, going on the lower business, so that I knew that when it was going to put in this cloud, that like lasery top end doesn't survive it. It doesn't survive like the cloud that this becomes, so it doesn't sound synthy or weird anymore. In fact, it actually kind of starts to sound like a realistic metallic event that would occur in an instrument made to do this. But then we still have the kind of grouped up voiced unison of motion going on the low end that's not doing the synth thing of also screwing up the top end. And that was the most planning that this guy required, because then it was just the same thing. It's just reverb and delay together. You can hear how that's a little more brassy in this version with the chords. Octaves. I guess that was more than chords, more than octaves. So you also you probably hear that sounded kind of white noisy there. That's also very synthy. Individually, these all sound pretty synthy. And so here's this guy, the big dude. So first off, I'm accomplishing motion here on the notes here with slide notes. I'm doing that because I have to start early on the actual note that plays the thing. The reason why that is because in my effort to do doing the whole like plan, being in the limitations of the instrument I'm trying to do here, I want this to sound like someone playing like a lyrical like musical instrument, and we're doing this with attack on the volume, and I have A and B active. B is A is a lower octave than B, so this is again the higher. This is like the higher register, so it's actually like doing the job of a number of instruments at once, and we're kind of relying on like the Zimmer school of arranging instruments, which is to try and like they're not really moving around a lot. They're moving around a little. They're just moving, but they're not like demonstrating the full articulate range of these instruments. And that's because the synthesis is just not necessary. Like necessarily capable of doing that, or necessarily something I really want to be doing with my work. It's a lot of work. But because of this is like a really big lead in here. Like it wouldn't sound on time if I actually just griddedly put a MIDI note on the grid. It would sound like it was just off time, like it was delayed. So I have to like kind of lead into it, like you would if you were actually playing the instrument. And that's why the timing is a little bit janky. But while it's playing, like as you're playing it, you kind of like hammer on your way down to whatever note you want, and then also lets me do these little bits. Like, that's a lot of fun, and it vaguely sounded reasonable, like as a like a realistic thing. And so this is possible because of the way the layering is happening. The basic premise is like the other guys, is some saw wave stuff with some unison filtering. I'm using the Hertz mode unison mode on here. The Hertz mode difference between the regular, literally all the other modes, and then the Hertz mode is that this means that it increases the detune is a Hertz value, which is the same across all the harmonics. And like 1 hertz on a 40 hertz tone is so much change, and 1 hertz on a 10,000 hertz tone is like percentage wise not even close. And that creates an extremely different tone than like a regular unison, which changes how much unison is on each harmonic to be a musical change, so that it changes on a note and not just on a hertz value. I think I really just described that in a way that made sense to me because it's really what it sounds like happens. However, there are some eccentricities about the mode, which is that it also appears to be random phase. I think that might have something to do with how that, because the effect of this is that it sounds it's a much more like metallic sounding unison, and it's because it's not very musical, and the higher frequencies are phase canceling in a way that's much denser than normal. And the density is what mattered here. And I mean, the phase randomness helps. Like I have actual phase randomness also engaged too, but like the randomness helps because I want the notes to sound like they're being played. And like horsehair bows or synthetic string bows or whatever, like there's actually research out there about like a synthesis of a string that involves like phase synthesis and creating a tone based on the idea of like how much hair is interacting with a string and crap like that. It's pretty cool. Cool idea. The thing about this that's working though, cool ideas, is frequency layering, because this side is just dark as hell. And this has to do with like the trumpets, like the brassy kind of overactive planning of knowing how this is going to interact with the reverb and the delay. So this guy is like, I was doing that with the unison on the other end to be like, okay, the low one is going to act this way and the high one is going to act this way. But this, I actually I was like the low octave is going to act this way and the high octave is going to act this way. So that's why they're separate. And this guy is doing that tone completely, and then the rest of it is being taken up by the high guy. Oh yeah, that's what it sounds like with that reverb, by the way. The other bit is I got that vibrato going on, and I have vibrato level modulation He's doing wee, so you're kind of like leading into it, like you would on like a lyrical kind of note. I'm using that term because it's what East West uses to like describe the expressive. And I use that term too, expressive and lyrical and that kind of thing. I got a little like swell going on in the filter too. Like these kinds of like, this is very different from like a very precise kind of plucky bass approach to things that I normally do on synthesizing stuff, because that's all perfect and rigid and synthesized. And this is us trying to like fake like a texture, right? Because we know that we're not going to synthesize a real instrument, and then every time we like consider about what's different about the instrument and the real thing, it's usually about rounding out the edges, because the real instrument can't be that perfect. And when we when we hear in our minds what we're expecting to hear, we're hearing the result of that imperfection. So if we live within that imperfection, then we create a texture that is sort of what we expect, and then we don't question it so much, and then we just kind of run with it, and the listener goes with it. So not questioning it so much also involves not going so far out of bounds with it. That's why the octaves, because I could do these in two different instruments and like do chords and separate them and whatever, but the chances of doing that, like kind of breaking the illusion, are higher the more that you do, you know? And this illusion like is honestly, it's the best I've done yet, just for me, because we can hear this thing almost by itself and have it actually kind of sound convincing. Like that's still pretty synthy, clearly, right? Like that's very like, I'm not gonna say that's real, but that's more real than like a lot of professional fake real I've heard. And together with all the stuff, it doesn't sound like a bunch of fake things. It sounds like real things drowned out by a bunch of different fake things, like as if it were a big cacophonous layer, which is what I ultimately would have done if I had broken out like the big sets to try and accomplish this against, and then also having actual synthesis around it. Because this is also designed to be light touch enough to go above like the hard hitting stuff. And that's been the fun part about working on this track so far. Anyway, I'll put up in the description of this video a zip that's got those three guys: the low guy, the mid guy, and the high guy. And you can poke around with those if you like. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.